Good afternoon, Garland Nixon here with my good friend, Dr. Tony Monteiro, straight out of Philadelphia. And we've got important things to talk about. We're at a very dangerous time with the Biden administration being lame ducks and certainly taking actions that could have tremendous consequences for the world. Let's talk. Hello, and most of the viewers and most of our friends and members of this channel are very familiar with Dr. Tony Monteiro. He does great work. He works with the Saturday Free School out of Philadelphia. We'll tell you about that at the end of the video, how you can find out more about it and the good work that they're doing. But right now, we got important things going on. Tony, one of the things that this takes me back to is when the decision was made to take Joe Biden out of the race and replace him with Kamala Harris. And people ask a legitimate question. Well, if he's not competent to run for election, can he be competent to run the country? And with our own eyes and ears, we had seen the answer to that question in the debate. We saw, notwithstanding all of my objections to the lifelong policies of Joe Biden, but we saw that even now he is completely incompetent. We see horrifying things happening, and the question has to be asked: who's making these decisions? What's going on behind the scenes? Your thoughts, Dr. Tony Monteiro.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Garland. But I think the question you ask is the central question in this period before Trump's inauguration, especially given that in ways, effective ways, we are at war with Russia. The president of Russia has said that. And this is the result of the launching of these attack missiles into Russia, and Zelensky, but really the American government, or those people who claim to represent the government or be the government, has given the Ukrainians, actually the Americans who run these attackums and operate them, the right to escalate the war in Ukraine, and now to make it a war between Russia and the United States, Russia and Great Britain. So the issue is who's running the government, because we've heard nothing from the president or the vice president or the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense about this matter. Now, if Russia says they're at war with the United States and that they have redesigned in some respects their policy about the launching of nuclear weapons to respond to what they are saying is a war with the United States, it seems like somebody in the United States government, especially the president, should have something to say to the American people. We're in perhaps one of the greatest existential crises that the country has ever faced, which is also an existential crisis for humanity. And we've heard nothing from our president or our vice president. I think I said this in one of our discussions, Garland, that the day after the election would be as important, or I should say the days after the election. This brief interregnum between the election and the inauguration of a new president has given a lot of space for people who do not have peace on their agenda, who have war on their agenda, to capture maybe the entire government, maybe what we have experienced and are experiencing is something that looks like a soft coup d'etat. Because by Biden and Kamala Harris's silence, they're basically saying that on this question of war and peace, they're out of the loop. This is quite dangerous, I think.
And the other, the other part of it. So we were lectured for 4 years about democracy. If you remember, Joe Biden, I'm having a summit for democracy. This is democracy versus autocracy. Democracy's on the ballot. If Donald Trump might not accept the outcome, etc. It was clear. Donald Trump made a statement, with full regard for all of the policies Donald Trump may have for Gaza or whatever that I may find distasteful on the issue of Ukraine. He was very clear. I would like to end this. On the issue of Ukraine, Kamala Harris, the representative of the Biden administration, was clear. We want to continue it. The people made an overwhelming decision. That's democracy. Like it or not, agree with that. We could talk all of the problems we have with our voting system and who was available at the end, but the people made a decision. Overwhelming. We want this ended. And it seems to me that what we're seeing is the reality of this deep state, neocon, whatever names that we have, that when it all comes down to it, the people said, I don't want this. And the answer from the Democratic Party, which is clearly the representation of the the political representation of the deep state, is clear. You have said you don't want it. We got a race to January 20th to set things on a course possibly where the American people's democratic choice cannot be realized.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I see it in that way. A lot of people would say, well, Garland and Tony, you guys are, being hyperbolic, you're conspiratorial theorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think so. I think at least people should be concerned. And the other side of this, if Biden or Kamala Harris can't speak, if no one can speak to the American people about this situation, what is going on at the level of the state, the deep state? What is happening? The permanent government, the dark government, the unelected centers of power in our country. Who are these people? And do they have other aims in this brief period between now and the inauguration of a new president? Could they make a decision to overturn the election by not recognizing the process by which a new administration comes into power? Could they undermine that? We just don't know. What we do know is that the world is on the precipice of a deep and profound crisis that could lead to nuclear war. And the government of the United States has said nothing. Now, where all of this eventually goes, we don't know. But what we do know should, bring about deep concern. And like you say all the time, it's not a matter of what you think of Trump or Harris or Biden or any of these politicians. The fact of the matter is, elections took place. Trump won. Part of his platform is that he would end the war in Ukraine. And only a a week or two after the election, we get this launch of ATACMS missiles into Russia, which Putin and Lavrov and other high officials in the Russian government had said time and again, this would be a red line. And it would be a qualitative new stage in the war, and that the United States, by authorizing these ATACMS missiles into Russia, and by operating the missiles and by operating the satellites that give the information that is fed into these missiles, that that we are now at war with Russia. And Russia responded a few days, a week ago, with a missile attack of some say a tactical nuclear weapon, some say a ballistic missile, but nonetheless, something wholly new in the history of missile warfare. Now, the missile that they used to strike Ukraine was not armed with a nuclear weapon, but it could have been. And it was a demonstration to the United States from the Russians of what they are capable of doing and what they will do. And I think not only from the standpoint of world war, but from the standpoint of the nature of American democracy and government, we are somewhere I don't think that we've ever been, especially when you put side by side the possibility of nuclear war in a way that we've never seen it. I don't remember during the whole time of the Cold War where either the United States or Russia claimed to be at war with the other nation. I don't remember a leader of the United States or Russia saying that. Russia has now said that. Putin has now said that, which means that we're somewhere we've never been. The other side of it, that's the global international part of it. The other side of it is, are there forces in the US military, in the US state, such as Rear Admiral Buchanan, who said last week that we must be ready to fight a nuclear war with the Russians. And he was presuming, I think, that we could win, where every expert known to man has said that nuclear war is unwinnable. Everyone loses. For him to say that, now he is not elected. You know, who does he answer to? Is there a government that he must answer to? Or has a new cabal, has something else transpired? And he is speaking on behalf of a set of decision makers, of actors within the state who are accountable to no one and are making decisions that will affect us and the rest of humanity.
You know,
by the way, I call that, if what I'm seeing and so on, if I'm accurate, I call it a coup d'etat, a secret coup. And it seems like this is my last point, darling.
Sure.
Talking too long. If you didn't know any better, you would have to presume that Biden and Kamala Harris, the president and the vice president, are incommunicado, are being silenced and shoved aside by those who are making these decisions. And I would say again, if that is the case, then should we presume, or do we have the right to presume, that Trump will be inaugurated. Well, I think there are questions. I have questions about whether this process of the inauguration of a new president can be guaranteed.
I think your concerns are valid based on what's happening. Generally, when a president wins, the job of the current administration is to set the table, is to start the preparations for a change of power. That's their job, to begin the preparations, certainly to handle the day-to-day housekeeping of the government. Now, as we both know, sometimes they'll say, well, I've got this bill on taxes for such and such, or this or that, and they'll pass some, various little things that they want to get through. Then generally they'll have some constituents that need to be forgiven for their crimes, such as Mark Rich. Maybe some money passes under the table, and somebody gets part. Look, we understand that we may not like it. We understand that it's crooked, but those are the kinds of things that traditionally happen, right? Okay, my son, Hunter Biden. If they said, I'm going to pardon Hunter Biden, I'd shake my head a little bit, but I'd say, I know the game in DC. Sure, he's going to pardon Hunter Biden and everybody that's dear to him. People would shake their heads about the corruption, but they would say, we understand the game, and we kind of expected that. But when there is literally an electoral mandate for something, a very specific thing, and the current administration says, we're going to take this opportunity to fight back against the political mandate that just happened.
Yeah.
You have to think that inside there's some discussions. Well, if a new president comes in, we could get in trouble for that. If a new president comes in, people could start saying, hey, I'm a whistleblower. Guess what happened? As soon as you won, they said, well, we're not listening to him. We better do this before. So clearly, the actions that they're taking at this point create an issue of liability for those actors once the new administration comes in. Should somebody rat them out and say, guess what they did in this period of time between when right? And they have to know that if I can figure it out, they can, which tells me, for whatever reason, they ain't concerned about that, or they got bigger fish to fry, or maybe they don't be planning with any of us will be alive on that. I don't know. But your other discussion is valid. One of the ways that I've been finding this stuff out, the New York Times, unnamed officials say, that's what the articles say, unnamed officials say Biden's going to do this. Unnamed officials. Meanwhile, I look online and I see President Vladimir Putin went on TV and had a discussion with all of the people of Russia. And he even said, well, should I ever decide to launch some attack in Europe, I will advise the people of Europe. I will advise the citizens first so that they can get out of the way. If I'm going to attack a base or blow up something, I'll let them know.
Yeah.
And he even showed it doesn't have to be nuclear. I have powerful weapons now that are conventional. I don't have to go nuke. But if I get ready to hit something, I will tell but so I see the so-called brutal autocratic dictator on TV carefully spelling out his plans and the circumstances that they find themselves in to the people of his country, having won 87% of the vote. And here I see nothing but unnamed sources. How in the world does the New York Times get access to unnamed government officials, and none of those named government officials have anything to say?
Yeah. No, I don't know that this has ever occurred where a outgoing administration has made decisions about war and peace and world war, and no one says anything. But in the period, the interregnum, the transition period between the current administration handing over government power to the next one, and this administration has made a decision, at least, that will tie the hands of the incoming administration to negotiate for peace to end the war in Ukraine. So this administration, or whoever is making decisions, have literally tied the hands of the incoming administration, in spite of an election that established a mandate. And one of the issues that was prominently discussed, and which we have to presume the American people were aware of and voted upon, was peace in Ukraine. And now we have a situation of not moving towards peace, but moving towards a qualitatively new stage of war in Ukraine, and by implication, Europe, and in a broader sense, war between the two major nuclear superpowers, Russia and the United States. And we have not heard a word from the president. Garland, you know, I really don't want to sound alarmist or hyperbolic or conspiratorial. But in any definition of coup d'etats, this looks like one. It looks, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, and if it does everything that a duck does, that's what it is. I think we're in a political crisis in the United States. Another thing, the way that they are now focusing upon Tulsi Gabbard and the Department of National Intelligence. And I think that position, as well as the Justice Department, are the two key levers, institutional levers of what power and what the struggle for power will look like in the next 3, 4, or how many years. You just don't know. You just don't know. We do know that the Biden administration, in so many obvious and not obvious ways, had attacked dissent. It had even Kamala Harris's campaign, especially when it came to Black folk, kind of tried to outlaw opposition or dissent to the Democratic Party. We saw with Barack Obama pointing his fingers at Black men, Michelle Obama trying to initiate a gender war within the Black community. And we've seen it from so many other commentators, some of whom claim to be on the left, who make the argument that even though Trump won, he is illegitimate. And even if Tulsi Gabbard can win confirmation through the Senate, because Trump is illegitimate, she's illegitimate. His government is illegitimate. His administration is illegitimate, even if he won the popular vote and the electoral vote. And, at the level of the government that is unseen and unelected, their priorities are not democracy. Their priorities are power, how to consolidate it, and how it will be used to consolidate American hegemony, militarily, economically, and other ways, and how it will be used to thwart democracy. And I'm not talking about the democracy of the day of an election. I'm talking about democracy as it must exist every day. In particular, the right to dissent, the right to disagree, the right to protest. As King said, the right to protest for right. Well, the people who it seems are in charge right now don't give a damn about any of that. So the threat to democracy, ironically, is not Trump. He might be a victim, and his presidency a victim of the deep state, who has enormous power and does not have a commitment to democracy, the American people, or humanity, but whose main aim is power and state power. And that's where it's at.
Well, and it's something that I've discussed over the course of the years, and that is, what you see the empire, the U.S. empire, do worldwide at some point when they feel threatened, it'll come home. Those are the tactics they have, and they use those tactics to overthrow the government of Guatemala or try to overthrow Georgia, you name it, whatever, Bangladesh, they're going to use those. But when they feel threatened at home, those exact same things come home, and they include assassinations. I am convinced that there were multiple assassination attempts against Donald Trump, and there were likely others that we weren't told about. Other plots that were other plots that were hatched. And at this point, I keep using this term, the race to January 20th. Number one, that we can make it, with that we have to say, hopefully, and I've said this, luckily for us, Russia's been around for 1,000 years. China's been around for thousands of years. As a civilization, Iran's been around for many, many years. And the fact that they've been around that long tells us that there's a level of wisdom there that isn't here. And so I can only cross our fingers, that we can cross our fingers and hope that the wise leaders of those countries understand that what they're looking at is a trap. That this is a trap. That the deep state here is trying to trap them into a world war that Donald Trump can't get out of. That to risk it all. Your thoughts on what we see in the Democratic Party, because nobody's asking these questions. Now, we see people that got 350,000. If it's one guy got 3, Roland Martin. We see Al Sharpton got $1 million or $500,000. We see all these people that were paid off. These are questions that are important, right? And the media is not asking these questions. Congress, the Democrats there, the people, so-called Black leadership class, or even non-Black people who got nobody's. Why is it that you and I and people, we've got to turn to YouTube for these blatantly obvious questions to be discussed?
Yeah, well, first of all, a lot of these pundits and so-called civil rights leaders who are not really civil rights leaders at all, we can talk about why they're not, but they're paid operatives of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party suffered more than an electoral defeat. If it were just that, they could live with it. They could rebuild the party. It's going to be a difficult job anyway. But there's something more that happened. This election is the beginning of a deeper political realignment of the people, where the entire working class in its majority have left the Democratic Party. The working class, along with Black folk, became the ground, the foundation of the Democratic Party after Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. I know my parents, my grandparents remained throughout their lives loyal to the Democratic Party of Franklin Roosevelt. My parents just didn't, or at least my father didn't realize that after Bill Clinton, that's not the Democratic Party we're dealing with, but just to label the Democratic Party. But now we have had this vast and profound realignment. And the working class, including huge numbers of Black workers, have left the Democratic Party. And I don't think they're coming back anytime soon. So how does the ruling elite rule in this way, in the ways that it is accustomed to ruling, when the party that had become its instrument, its primary instrument, could no longer when the working people, the lower middle class, young people and women could no longer put together a coalition that could win the presidency or win Senate or congressional seats in states. Well, yes, they lost an election. Yes, it gave Trump a mandate, but there's something more happening. I always refer to the New York Times Siena poll and other polls that show 70% and more of the American people feel the country is going in the wrong direction. Some have moved so far to the left. And it's so interesting that the mainstream media keeps saying that the working class moved right. No, they didn't. Look at the polls. They moved against the Democratic Party, who had betrayed them in the ways that they govern. So, but when you look at the polling data, the masses of people, especially working people, are saying they want a fundamental reform of government, of the economic and political systems. And 15% of them say that they would support the toppling of the economic and political systems and replacing them with something new. Well, I don't know what you call left if that's not left. The thing is that the people who run the Democratic Party, those who command power at the level of the state, are unaccustomed to the American people being this, well, I'll use this word, this woke, real wokeness, being awakened to what their class interests are. Here, and you know, Garland, I become really kind of impatient, I'll put it this way, with so many on the left who could not see a way forward, so they retreated to that which the majority of working people had rejected. That is the Democratic Party, the neoliberal, neocon war party, which at the national and city and state levels had done very little for the people, but everything for the war makers and the military-industrial complex. You know, if Franklin Roosevelt, and he did, represented what came to be called the welfare state, the redistributive state, that the state should redistribute wealth and income and power to the people, that government had to establish a social contract with the people. In essence, that's what the New Deal began to represent. However, it has been replaced, and especially in the last 25 years, by an out-and-out warfare state. A state committed to imperial empire and war to achieve and realize it. This is where we are, and hence the struggle for peace is so important. And this goes beyond Trump. The people, I think, use Trump as an instrument to express their anger at the so-called liberals who were parading as progressives. And that's what he became. But the people must now be the major agent of the struggle for peace and for democracy in this country.
I think that what you're saying about the ruling elite, the collapse of the ruling elite, and their people recognizing their right to govern, I think one of the ways that I see it manifesting is the rejection of the infrastructure that they use to control and brainwash the masses. And here's what I mean.
Yeah.
MSNBC, collapsing. The numbers are collapsing. CNN collapsing. People don't even want to be associated with them anymore. And you turn on MSNBC and I've watched it. I can't, it's unwatchable. I watch it and I'm like, I know those things that are not true. It says MSNBC News. I don't see anything about forest fires or earthquakes or something bad that happened or, something good. There's no news there. It is 24 hours of political propaganda on behalf of the war machine and the ruling elite. That's all it is. It is now. They don't even pretend anymore. They march out. This is so-and-so for general, retired general. He's former CIA chief, former NSA chief. Now let's go to the president's spokesperson. They literally, the spokesperson for the Biden administration resigns and gets a job on MSNBC, basically doing the same thing. I say all that to say this. I think they understand in the collapse of the ratings for these and the fact that now the people that own them are just saying we got to sell them off. NBC News is literally saying we've got to distance NBC News from MSNBC. It's so putrid and rancid. It's so radioactive that it's dragging our ratings down. And I think the ruling elite are looking at that saying, this whole thing's coming apart. The wheels are coming off the car. Not only have people rejected our right to rule, we don't have the infrastructure to brainwash and control them anymore. It's the game is up, which makes it plausible, as you're saying, as you argue to me, that they've decided to just say, we can't let Trump in. We can't let anybody in. We need an excuse. But meanwhile, maybe if we start a war or whatever we start, then we can say, well, we can't change horses in the middle of the street. But anyway, your thoughts on all of that, the collapse of their infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. And of course, the ideological and propaganda arm of the state is as important as the arms of the state that carry out actual repressive activities, coup d'etats, assassinations, and so on. Because one of the things that the people who run this country have found, and they're not discovered, and they're not ignorant people, is that to rule and to claim its democracy, they have to have the moral high ground. They must be able to plausibly say to the American people, if we're in war, it's because we're doing it to defend democracy. We're doing it to defend Ukraine's right as a sovereign nation, and so on and so forth. So they need to be able to convince tens and hundreds of millions of Americans that the government is acting democratically and from a moral standpoint. And the way they do that is through the media, through social media, through the movies, through television, through the commercial culture that is imposed upon us, and so on and so forth. Sports is one of the main levers of pacification of the people. Pop culture is another form of pacification and distraction. In the end, then, if the people are distracted, then of course they're not concerned with what their government is doing or not doing. However, something happened. Something has happened where the people increasingly no longer believe the rulers of the country or what they hear on CNN or MSNBC, at least, or Fox. At least they will question it in a way that all of this culture, all this propaganda was to prevent. It was to distract them. If you don't see, if anybody doesn't see what's going on at the level of the people, and all they see are parties and candidates, and of course we have to pay attention to that. But what is driving it all, and this is new in American politics, is the anger and discontent of tens and hundreds of millions of Americans. They say it every time they're polled about it. We are unhappy with the American government. This is what they also call a crisis of legitimacy. When the government can't rule in the old way. You know, we talk about Antonio Gramsci, we talk about Lenin, these people who had a revolutionary experience. Lenin said, when the ruling elite or the ruling class can't rule in the old way, and the people will not be ruled in the old way, you're on the cusp of a revolutionary change. I would only add to that, or maybe a civil war, break in the social and political systems. And Gramsci talked about this interregnum period, where the new that the people want to see be born cannot be born. And so I would say, you know, we have this separation of millions of Americans from the people that rule and govern them. How this will play out, none of us can predict. But this situation where the ruling class does not have the support of the people is, I think, very new in America. And if you don't take note of it, you can't understand the events that are taking place right at this moment.
And you know, when you talk of civil war, right? The traditional perspective in the US is the working class. One dons the blue uniforms, one dons the gray uniforms, and they slaughter each other until the ruling elite are tired of it, and then they make a deal. But I think we're looking at something very different here, because the people as a group, look, because what, and here's what they used to say, a race war or whatever, right? The people, Black folks, have come together and says, well, regardless, notwithstanding whatever I think of Donald Trump, he seems like a better option. Or I just, the Democrats upset me so much, I want something different, or I'm going to stay home. So to call it a civil war when the majority of the people, and keep in mind something, he won in a blowout amongst voters. 40%, I believe, of the voters don't even bother anymore, don't even belong to a party or more. So you have to take them as people who've thrown in the towel. That 40% of the voters already are done. They see nothing in for them, so they're already out of that. They know they're not supporting it. Then you have the majority, you have the voters left. He took the majority of the people who do vote. So an overwhelming majority of the country is finished with the ruling elite and their way of doing things. So to say that a civil war when probably 75% of the voters are on one side, if there were anything resembling that, to me, it's what we're seeing now. It is within the context of the ruling elite, the power players saying, we refuse to accept the political mandate, and we refuse to accept any politicians who say, let's go along with the mandate. That effectively what we traditionally saw as the Civil War, takes us back to where we started with our conversation of some kind of a coup that's necessary to thwart democracy, to thwart the political change that people want.
Oh, yeah. I think to me, it's quite apparent. You know, Carlin, I just don't understand why honest leftists, Black leftists, do not see a path forward, who are so so narrow in their thinking, where the only thing they see is that we have to make the Democratic Party able to win national elections again. We have to change the Democratic Party. Well, I think that horse is out of the barn. I think the Democratic Party is a spent force. I think they trotted out the best that they had. Bill Clinton, Hillary, Barack, and Michelle Obama. They put as much money into this election, the bigger part of the ruling elite. Kamala had at least $1.5 billion and 24/7 support from the mainstream media at every level. And she still lost. And from the standpoint of the ruling class, they said, well, what more can we do? If we did all of this and we used lawfare and we indicted Trump, if we threatened him with assassination and none of this stopped him or his election, then what do we do? And I think you can imagine at the level of the ruling elite, them having these discussions. This is where we talk about the state. But what I do not understand, and I really don't understand, who and what are these so-called Black leftists thinking about? What do they see? Maybe they see something that I don't see. But this constant discussion of, well, Kamala lost the election because the Democrats didn't communicate their message well enough to the people. You've heard that? No. The message that they had to communicate was rejected by the people. The message has been communicated through the Democratic Party since 1990. I mean, we're talking, of 30-some years. Francis Fukuyama, the so-called great philosopher, said history has ended. There is not a need for a struggle for power. Liberal democracy, which means the democracy of the West, of the colonialists, etc., of the war makers, has won. And all we have to do is accept it. I think a lot of Black people, intellectuals and leftists, have almost imbibed that idea of an end of history. And at an end of history, meaning that the Democratic Party would be the best hope for Black people. I think many of them even bought into the idea that the Democratic Party embraces and continues the legacy of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. Certainly, the way they made Barack Obama into an icon, and some of them would suggest that he is Martin Luther King of the 21st century. I mean, if this is not the case, I think those who would disagree with what I'm saying should make their case better. I don't think they have made an argument for Black folk to return to the Democratic Party. I don't think they've made a plausible argument of why I should enter into an alliance with people like Al Sharpton and Barack and Michelle Obama or the Clintons. Why, they're always talking about, well, we're facing fascism, and that what we're fighting for by supporting a Biden or Kamala Harris or whatever, Hillary Clinton, these neoliberal, neocon Democrats. Well, we're part of a broad anti-fascist front that by electing Kamala Harris, that gives us space to struggle in the future. It's almost hilarious. The Biden administration, in the whole period of the Cold War and even before, is the most war administration in American history. It is the most war administration. Now, if you're about civil rights, I think it was Martin Luther King who made it very clear that civil rights cannot be separated from anti-war. that civil rights can't be separated from anti-poverty. So to the people who are making an argument about an anti-fascist front against Trump, well, the question is, well, can you separate the question of war and peace from the question of anti-fascism? How is the Biden administration not what they say Trump is or his movement is, but yet support a war administration? How is anti-fascism separable from anti-war? I think, Garland, I think we're going to have a very frank and open discussion in the Black community, among Black leftists. We have to stop, this podcasting where you go on and make statements unchallenged. If you have a position, feel confident enough, not just to state it, but to be able to put it on the table for discussion. I don't see that. They're crying in their milk. They're sad. They don't know what to say. How could this happen? Well, we're going backward, all of this kind of stuff. Well, we're not going backward. We're in a period of great change politically in the country, and it's being driven by the people. And all of this talk about only 20% of Black men and only 10% of Black women voted for Trump. That's only half of the story. Like I said here in Philadelphia, another 20% of Black men didn't vote. So together, the 20% or more, really, that voted for Trump or Jill Stein, another third party, along with the 20% who did registered voters who didn't vote, that doesn't include those that don't even register. We're looking perhaps at something like close to 50% of Black men registered voters. And I think the numbers for Black women, while not as high, are close to that. So I think the Black community has said it clearly. They haven't said it loudly, but they're saying it clearly, that the Democratic Party has betrayed us. The so-called civil rights leaders are not civil rights leaders. The so-called intellectuals, Black intellectuals, are more self-serving than they are concerned with the fate of the masses of people. I think we're in a different moment in history. We've never been here, and we may as well get ready for what is to come. And if there is fascism, I think it's deeply embedded and has been so for many decades in the deep state. That is what has brought us to this crisis of war and peace and a crisis of democracy in this country.
Additionally, in arguing for the possibility, the potential of a denial of the Trump administration being seated by the current administration, I think that if you look past the election, the Democratic Party is even in worse trouble. I mean, past the January 20th. What happens? Donald Trump comes in. Apparently, he's going to, the word now is Grinnell or whatever the guy's name is. He's going to say, you are the envoy, go forth and end the conflict, right? Okay. At that point, the Democratic Party, overwhelmingly people all over the world, and people here are going to be saying that's a good idea. The Democratic Party will be in a position where they will have to say, we're against it. We're fighting against it. They, based on the positions that they've taken, Donald Trump will be saying, whether he can or not is irrelevant. He gets Grinnell and he says, go forward, meet with the Russians and try to get this thing over. They're in both here and in Europe, they are now in a terrible position because the people in Europe who are struggling are going to say, does that mean we can get Russian gas again and maybe save our industries and our jobs at a time when hundreds of thousands are being laid off? Volkswagen, Ford, Bosch, laying people off. They're going to say, is it possible we can maybe save our economy? That's a good idea. The people here, Germany has an election February 23rd, a month afterwards, right? There's been over 1 million now on some signature in the UK calling for a new election. And I think people understand that if Donald Trump can come in and somehow get the volume turned down, I'm not saying he can or can't, but if he starts, the Russians have said, look, we're ready to talk. We're not unreasonable. We want to end it the same way. Let's talk. Let's start off by saying they've said, if you say we'll recognize the new territories and we'll agree on neutrality for Ukraine, we can move forward. We can start there. So they're very reasonable. The Democrats are going to be in a position of having to fight that. The deep state is going to be in a position of having to fight that. When the American people and the people of Europe are going to be screaming at the top of their lungs, let's get it done. I don't think they're ready for that potential. And I think that's maybe a reason why what you're positing, that they're up to no good before January 20th, is something that has to be considered, and I will say this, and has to be discussed out loud everywhere. People have to start talking about this so they're on notice that we're wise to them, if that's what they're trying to do.
Oh yeah, I think public discussion is one way of our fighting for democracy and peace. That's not the only way. We have to demonstrate, we have to be in the streets. But we need a discussion, a broad discussion, and in particular among Black folk. And I say that because of our role in the history of the United States, always on the side of progress, always on the side of peace and democracy for all people. If we're contained and we cannot play this large historic role that we have played in the past, then all Americans suffer. And part of what the function of the Black misleadership class has been is to prevent Black folk from playing the role that we have traditionally played, either as it was in the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, the anti-war movement, the leaders that we have produced, the culture that we have produced. If we cannot play our role, American history is a little bit darker. There is the possibility of a way out of this crisis becomes dimmer. However, you see, a lot of people, not only the Democratic Party, but the Black misleadership class suffered a serious blow. If you go into these cities like Philadelphia, with a Democratic machine that is pretty much controlled by Black politicians, could not turn out the Black vote for Kamala. The numbers were way below Biden in 2020. In other words, in a city where Black people are approaching a majority, at least of the Democratic Party, and here you have a Black woman running for president, and she gets fewer votes than the Black man, the white man, I should say, who ran 4 years earlier. And not just a small number, upwards of 60 to 70,000 fewer voters turned out in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is almost a completely Democratic city. The Black political class was rejected by the Black voters of Philadelphia. And I could put it very frankly, Black people don't trust Black politicians. They don't. Well, Black people don't trust too much of anybody. They don't trust Black intellectuals. They maybe trust you, Garland, because you have a more down-to-earth and more honest way of talking about very complicated and difficult issues. But I don't find much love for the Black political class in Philadelphia. And I think that could be said for Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and all of these cities have black mayors. Or I think they do, or most of them, a good
Yeah,
number.
I think they all do.
Yeah. And most black people say, so what? We have to find a different path of struggle. So I think the Democratic Party is a spent force. They keep talking about what they have to do to remake the party, and they're kind of talking about we have to return to the New Deal's type of policies, and we have to win back the working class. Well, it's too late for that. It's too little, too late. You're not going to win the working class back. But deeper, your worldview, which is tied to neoliberalism, globalization, and so on, is not going to allow it. Biden can talk about all that they did for the working people in his administration. But the fact of the matter is that the separation of wealth and income grew. Whether they admit it, poverty increased, especially in these cities and especially among Black and brown people. Poverty increased. All of the official statistics can say whatever they want, like on inflation. Well, the inflation that they're measuring is not the inflation that affects the majority of people, like electric bills, like gas bills. Yeah, I can understand what we experience at the supermarket. But what about my gas bill? What about my property taxes? What about the price of riding public transportation in these cities? They're raising it, cutting back on service. These are all inflationary. And what about all of this money going to Israel and Ukraine, and you can't find money to do anything about public education in these big cities? People are connecting all of these dots. And the Democratic Party, especially in these big cities, have been in power and done nothing but line their pockets. So there is a political realignment in the making. And I would say just because we can't say how everything will play out, that's one thing. I mean, predicting is a very difficult thing in a time like this, a time of crisis. But the fact of the matter is, something is being born, something new is happening. There is a crisis of the state. There is a crisis of their rule. And of course, all of that is connected, as we've been saying, to the crisis of war and peace and nuclear war and genocide.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that one of the things that people like us have been able to, maybe, studying these things for many years and have been able to clearly connect is foreign policy, empire, imperialism, whatever you want to call it, neoconservative, the warmongering, and how it affects the ability of the state to provide services and infrastructure, et cetera, for the citizens. But they were able, as long as they could maintain a somewhat of a reasonable lifestyle, economic lifestyle for the people didn't put those together, no matter how much people like us screamed, hey, the reason we can't have, as they say, nice things is because how much does it cost for 900 bases? We pointed these things. Another reason, and again, when we get back to the possibility that there could be some kind of an internal coup going on in refusal to seat the new administration, I think also they realize something, and that is when people say, and I do my still have a radio show every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. WPFW, which is a Pacifica station. It's a 50,000 watt station, so I get a lot of calls. I had a caller call in and say, oh, everything's fine. And, the economy is actually very good and blah, blah, blah. A week later, I had a woman call, and that's outside of what I normally get. A woman called and went on to talk about I'm struggling and all this money's going to Ukraine and Israel and this and that, and they got nothing for. Here's my point. Another problem they have, there is a cat that's out of the bag that they can't put back in. The American people, because of this Ukraine conflict happening at the exact same time that their material lives were in, economic existence was in dramatic and precipitous deterioration, right? So my life is going to hell. I make the same amount I did a year ago, but I can't afford the things that I bought a year ago. And I'm struggling and I'm angry and I'm upset. And I see 100 billion, 60 billion, 8 billion going for Ukraine. I don't know the details of it, but I hear the television say we got to spend another 60 billion. And then I see a bunch of people in Congress, and you saw this, dancing, waving Ukraine flags, celebrating that 60 billion just went to Ukraine. Here's my point. The problem they have now is the people have now connected this foreign policy money to the deterioration of their lives. Now that they've made that connection, you can't undo that.
No, that's right.
And so when they start to say, we got another budget for $876 billion for blah, 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 that ain't people gonna go bananas. The more money for this war there. Now that people have finally connected that in mass, I think they understand we can't undo this. How do we keep this gravy train rolling? How do we keep this thing going? The people are onto us now, and that's a big problem.
No, it's huge. It's huge, Garland. I just want to return to this thing of the warfare state. See, if the priority of the state is war, and I think it is, and I think the Biden administration unleashed the dogs of war on the world. They didn't hold them back. They unleashed them. Ukraine is Biden's war. They provoked this war by advancing a military policy towards Russia aimed at bringing the Russian government down. We have to get this straight. I don't think we've talked enough and made it clear enough for the people. The war in Ukraine is not Putin's war. The war in Ukraine is Biden's war. And of course, the financing of it and the sanctions, which were designed to bring the Russian government down, not to secure the sovereignty, quote unquote, of Ukraine. I think we have to get this clear. The other thing is the war in Gaza and in Lebanon and the Middle East is Biden's war, because there is no Israeli aggression or genocide without it being financed by the United States and the Biden administration. And then, of course, all this talk of war with China over Taiwan. Well, I would make the argument that the Biden administration unleashed the dogs of war on the American people and upon humanity. If we cannot solve the question of war and peace, we cannot move towards a new people's democracy. I don't give a damn what your ideology is. I don't give a damn how smart you claim to be. But simple political tasks, like the fight for world peace and against nuclear war, if we have anything left in us, we must go to our people. We must speak to them. We must mobilize them to stand up for peace. And we must say to them something that the Democrats and all these civil rights leaders, so-called, will never do. We have to say to the ordinary woman and man, you have the power to make a difference. You can be the one, you know? And this is where we are. Yeah.
One last thing. I see we've gone an hour, but one last thing that I think is important that we haven't really touched on, and I think it's critical. The foundation of neoliberal interventionalism, right? Warmongering is an argument that we're doing it for good. We've got to go to this country to bring them democracy. We've got to go to this country because the LGBTQ community or the women of Afghanistan or some minority is being mistreated. And of course, while we're there, we might as well help ourselves to all that oil and gold and copper because, wouldn't want that to go bad, right? But the liberal interventionalism foundation is war for good reasons. They got a problem. The barbarity of the Israeli genocide has laid bare that lie. The idea that you're after what you've done in the Middle East, the idea, and not just done, but you protect these people. That when the world comes together and say, well, this man's he's a war criminal, which is blatantly obvious. Our president says, well, no, our government says if someone tries to hold him accountable, we'll invade you, we'll attack you, we'll sanction you. We will use barbarous violence against someone who goes after a man that the world community has decided should be tried for war crime. So the barbarity of what's happened and our reactions to what's happened in Israel has exposed to the people of the United States what the ruling elite is. And I think they realize they can't get that back either. Again, another reason that we got to be concerned that they may say, not that, and I know the chat will say, well, Trump's going to support this, but that's not part of my conversation.
Yeah.
It's what they're doing. But your thoughts on how their barbarous act in this day and age, might I add, I also believe, MSNBC and CNN and all are crashing, right? They talk about the election. I think Israel's part of that too, because the people who are like, well, this is, I can't understand why they won't say it. And then they turn on YouTube and you and I or whoever, they can turn to all of these I've seen little teeny channels that have 1,500 subscribers, but they're talking about Gaza. So now a person says, but I can turn on the mainstream media and this infrastructure that you have, and I can't get it, and it doesn't even exist. Or you're supporting the genociders, but now I turn on YouTube and all these people are saying it's wrong, which is obvious. So again, your thoughts on how Gaza has exposed them for who they are and what the ramifications of that are.
Well, I think Gaza has exposed the Zionists, AIPAC, has exposed their enormous power over universities, over the media. And, that's a good thing. I mean, at great sacrifice to the Palestinian people. And we can never forget that and the debt that we owe them. But of course, the state is exposed. And I keep going back to this notion of the state. It is not just the government. The government is grounded, connected to the state. That is where real power resides. And it is unelected. It is permanent. It is where it gets its money, all of its money. No one knows. These secret budgets for the CIA and for other intelligence services. We're up to $1 trillion a year for the defense budget, the war budget. So the state has to be looked at. Yes, government policy. But where does real power over war and peace and ultimately of democracy reside? And it is in what they call the deep state. Others would say, well, that's the real state. And I would say it consists maybe of 10 million people, Americans that man the various institutions and agencies of the state, whose livelihood, whose careers are connected to the state. The CIA is a huge institution. Now, I've come to know some of these CIA agents because they've now flipped and become anti-war spokespeople. And so they tell us a little bit about what's going on. But nonetheless, it is the state and its threat to democracy. Now, people say, well, Donald Trump has run his mouth and said this, that, and the other. And he does talk too much. You know, he is reckless. And he is, from my point of view, from the standpoint of the struggle for peace and democracy, he is an unreliable force. However, the state, the deep state, did everything possible to prevent him being elected this time around. He is not embraced by the state. And his appointment of Tulsi Gabbard to be over the Department of National Intelligence, and then this woman Bondi, who have said openly that, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, she opposes the CIA. She opposed the dirty war in Syria. She said that the war in the Ukraine is Biden's war. And this woman Bondi that I know less about, what's her first name, by the way?
Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi. I don't know that. I knew more about Matt Gaetz. And outside of these allegations of what he did sexually and so on, the guy's position on war and peace, I felt, was stellar in the same way that Tulsi Gabbard's was. We could talk about some of his positions, especially on AFRICOM and the Ukraine and other places. But, you know, all of these figures are far more complicated than the mainstream media would have us believe. But my point is that the people that are bringing us close to war, world war, and could do irreparable damage to even bourgeois liberal democracy in the United States are not friends of Donald Trump. In fact, one could plausibly argue that if they can't contain him, they will again attempt to eliminate him physically from the scene. By the way, I think these deep state forces want to do everything to destabilize the society, that they would do things to provoke conflict among various groups. One thing I don't think is on the table, and that is the question of race war. I think working people see themselves in a more unified way than I have ever seen. For example, I often talk about North Philadelphia, which is the part of Philadelphia where most Black people live, and Butler, Pennsylvania, which is on the western side of the state. And I say, even though the people of Butler don't know the people of North Philly, in deeper ways they do know each other because they're suffering similarly. You know, maybe in some ways the people in Butler are suffering worse than the people in North Philly. You know, the only major public construction that was built in Butler in 60 years was a monument to their citizens who had died from drug overdoses, suicides, fentanyl, and so on. That tells you something about the suffering of those people. But the people of North Philly are suffering, and neither side is calling for race war. Both sides are calling for a democracy that will free the society from the war makers and the neoliberals and these big financial oligarchs. So I think That's the good news. I think we can win. I think there is a path forward. Will take a great deal of sacrifice, a great deal of what you do, having, people like Scott Ritter, and, this informing of the people is invaluable. And if the people know, the people can act appropriately, and new leaders will emerge. And I am not optimistic. I consider myself a realist. There are many dangers, but then we have a fighting chance. And we must always, as revolutionaries, as radicals, as progressives, give the working people a fighting chance. And we give them a fighting chance by giving them information, alternative explanations, and so on. So that's the way I see things.
Well, thank you. What an excellent discussion, everyone. Dr. Tony Monteiro. Before we go, people need to know about your work with the Free School and where they can find information about it. I think it's very important work. And for those who don't know about it, they do a lot of work on peace, a lot of discussion. Again, and you got to throw this in, the horror of the deep state. Here's a man who tried to get a deal on the Korean Peninsula. Mm-hmm. Yes. Which would greatly, if you think about it, if Donald Trump, I'll just say this, if he got a deal, let's just say, who knows if he can or not, if he were to theoretically get a deal to end the Ukraine conflict, well, now, how do they destroy Russia and go after China? If he says, look, I need a deal on the Korean, well, that turns down the volume and the tension in the Asia Pacific. The things that he's talking about doing would be cataclysmic for the neocon project. He doesn't have to change the world. Even one of those things changes everything.
Yeah. But the future is in the people's hands. Donald Trump, and I admire him having won after everything was thrown at him. I admire his political skills and his understanding that a political realignment is taking place, that the Democratic Party is not the party of the working class any longer, that the Republicans are that. But still, our best ally are the people. And they have shown themselves to be capable of a lot of things. And I think I really, I have to say, I'm encouraged by what I saw Black Philadelphia do on November 5th. It was hard for Black Philadelphia to vote for Trump, but it was not so hard not to vote, which meant that they were voting against Kamala and against Biden and really against Obama and that whole thing. So I see so much possibility. I know Philadelphia, I know Black Philadelphia, and that's what the Free School is committed to. We call ourselves a school because we believe in the political education of the people. Any revolutionary that does not devote herself or himself to the political education of the people at the grassroots level. We're finishing up in a couple of months the year of James Baldwin, celebrating his 100th birthday. A lot of people say, what does that have to do with revolution? Well, if you ask that question, you don't know James Baldwin. You know what I'm saying? And if you ask that question, you might not be a revolutionary yourself. You might be claiming what you're really not. So we're finishing up James Baldwin. We made a documentary that you can get on YouTube. It's called To Fulfill the Unfulfilled, to Answer the Unanswered, the revolutionary James Baldwin. We try to reposition him. You can find out what we're doing in this year by going to our website on Baldwin, entitled The Year of James Baldwin.com, I think, or .org, but just Google that. And if you want to know about the Free School, everything we do is open and transparent. You can find us on most of the social media platforms. We meet every Saturday and have discussions similar to what we're having now. And people are welcome to join in those discussions. And I should say, some years ago, we rejected identity politics, what has come to be called identity politics, where the individual and the self take priority over the people and the working people and the poor. So we rejected that. We always saw the possibility of a new alignment of forces politically in the country, and we were never, I should say this, we were never into this anti-Trump hysteria, etc. So, and so you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. By the way, we feel that Black liberation is the spearhead of the liberation of the country, of the nation. And so it is not exclusive to just Black people. In fact, this struggle has world dimensions. So you can be in India and be a part of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. And that's kind of us. We're modest. We're specific to a particular city, although we have residences or outreach to other cities. But we believe in the grassroots struggle, the old time struggle, the kind of struggle that they initiated in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, or Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. That's the civil rights paradigm. You go local, keep it with the people. You know what I'm saying? And that's how we operate. And by the way, I just want to say this. We feel that for the American nation, the model for the struggle ahead is more the civil rights movement than the Chinese Revolution. That framework, that model of struggle fits the American nation and the American people better than any other model of social transformation. The first thing is, it is a roadmap, and it achieves so much, and there's such a rich experience if we would only access it. So in this respect, it is King, it is Baldwin, Du Bois. We have a rich ideological history to draw from. That doesn't mean that we don't drink from the fountain of knowledge wherever it is. But we have a history, we have an experience, and it is that experience that has reshaped the American people and reshaped the American nation from the anti-slavery to the civil rights movement. And it is that framework that could be the framework that takes us to the next stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tony Monteiro. Everyone, a couple of things. Make sure, I've only see like 18 likes, so everyone make sure you like this. I don't know if it'll help with the algorithm or not, but do it anyway. Also, please, as you know, there's a lot of shadow banning going on. These conversations are very important, so please share this on all your social media platforms. I see currently we've been up to over 900 people today, viewers, but we've got 759 viewers. So that means 759 posts, be it on X or Facebook or wherever it is. Everyone, where I'm sure you, maybe even Telegram, I'm sure everyone in the chat has a another social media account somewhere. Please just share this on your social media. That's the way we can get together. That's the way we can share our discussions. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.